Hello dear chess lovers, it's white to play in this position. Please formulate the winning plan for white. We are talking about good bishop versus bad knight in today's episode, folks. Before, I talked about good knight versus bad bishop, so that's the other side of the same coin. We will talk about positions which favor the bishop over knight, especially in the endgames, and how we can convert those positions. We will try to understand what makes a bishop a good bishop, what are the conditions for that, and how do we sort of outplay the knight in those positions. I will invite you to stop the video in several moments today because I want you to get involved in those puzzles. So please use your own brain, stop the video at the right moment, and try to extract the right lessons. Well, of course, I will be guiding you in all these positions by explaining to you the reasons and so on. Okay, this is important because knight and bishop imbalance occurs all the time in chess. So internalizing those lessons gives you a higher chance of applying this in your games. Say that you know a position which favors the bishops, then you can exchange the right pieces in the middle game to reduce the position to a good bishop versus bad knight scenario, right? This is just one application of this skill that you will hopefully attain in this video, folks. Okay, so the first lesson is this: the bishop is a good bishop here because there are already weaknesses, namely the weak pawn on f6 that is on the same color as the bishop. Also in this position, the white king is much better than the black counterpart, right? So to be able to win, we need to create two fronts, so to speak. So this first weakness is our first front, let's say, and our better king is our second front. So these are the conditions to win. But how do we win? Because if you keep on waiting, there is no easy way for us to win this position, right? Black will also keep on waiting. For example, if you do bishop d8, king d6 is probably the way forward for black, and there's no real progress from there, right? So we have to be careful. But there's one thing that is so important. Maybe you also noticed that knights cannot lose tempo in chess, and endgames are about zugzwangs as well. Zugzwang is a very sharp endgame weapon. So is there a way for us to play for zugzwang where black needs to run out of moves? Imagine in this position, it will be black's turn again, right? Can you please imagine that, folks? If it will be black's turn right now, they'll be losing because there's no moves left for black. The knight is tied down on that pawn, and the king cannot stay on the sixth rank. Thus, you have to give way to the opponent's king, right? That's actually a perfect zugzwang position. There's only a single problem. It's white's turn right now. So our goal is to find a way to give the move to black. And you're a great player if you came up with the move bishop a3, just waiting. Well, the king has no moves left because king d5 is coming. Thus, knight b8 is the only move. And we keep on waiting, right? The idea is to force knight d7 and only here play bishop e7. And voila, we gave the move to black. The bishop is hitting the pawn at f6. Thus, the knight cannot move. The king cannot move. There are no other pawn moves left. And black is losing because now our king can invade on d5. Isn't it beautiful? It's as simple as that. Our king will invade, attack the knight, and there are many ways to win. We can even do this move order. We will take on f6, and the game is completely over because these pawns are also going to drop, basically, right? It's as simple as that. So what did we learn from this example? Also, if you do bishop f8, by the way, if instead of knight d7, if they go to d7 with the king, the same problem, right? Just king d5, knight c6. Now we can even play bishop g7 to attack the pawn like that. Knight a5, bishop f6. The problem is that all these pawns are on the same color as the bishop, and our bishop is definitely a good bishop, and we win. So the first lesson is knights cannot lose tempo, and we can win the game using zugzwang, right? Bishop can lose tempo because it can go here, wait. There are many waiting moves with the bishop, but there are no waiting moves with the knight. Knights have to lose control on all the previous squares it was controlling before, but it's not the same thing for the bishop, right? The bishop can do this and it still controls all the squares that was controlling before, but if the knight goes here, there's no more control on those squares that I was covered before, right? So that's the basic geometrical difference between the bishop and the knight. Another good bishop versus bad knight scenario, folks. What makes this bishop a good bishop here? Well, you tell me. You stop the video and you look at the board and you tell me why. It's as simple as that, folks. Look at the weakness on e6. It's on the same color as the bishop. And even the pawn on h7 is frozen on the same color as the bishop. The bishop is a very flexible piece. It's a very long-range piece. It can go and find those targets later on, right? It will be very difficult for knight to stop the bishop at some point. There is no way for black to change the pawn structure. Those are long-term and fixed weaknesses for black, and this makes our bishop very happy. If you look at the knight, it's restrained in this pawn chain, right? Knight is also need to guard all these weaknesses. This knight will be paralyzed into defending those pawns, while the bishop and the king will further improve their position. So that's, again, we have a better king as well. We have these ideas like king b5. So if you combine these two factors, white has enough to win this position. We will see how the winning plan goes on. First things first, bishop f3, very simple chess. He wants to simply attack the weakness on e6. a6 is designed to stop king b5, but now black also wants to play b5 check, right? And they want to drive our king backwards. So what should white play in its position? You're a great player if you found the move a4, because you're stopping b5 in this position. Plus, there's one more point to this move a4. Maybe you noticed it as well, folks. It will be very relevant very, very soon, okay? a4 is a great move, king c7, bishop g4. By simply attacking that target, that weak pawn, you're paralyzing the enemy knight. Now compare this bishop and this knight, right? There's a gigantic difference between these two pieces. That's our first weakness. Now, if we can manage to create the second weakness, we will have enough to win. And what is that second weakness, folks? Please stop the video and tell me that good-looking positional idea for white here. How do we activate our king further? Yes, you're a great player if you found the move a5, and white is destroying the entire pawn chain on the queen side to activate their king. It's as simple as that, right? If you take my pawn, then king c5, and look at this. An amazing king, a terrible knight on f8, and we have really enough to win. Also, you generate a one-pass pawn on the c file. That's beautiful for white. They can't take on a5. They tried king c6, and now black wants to chase our king backwards with b5. So of course we take on b6. And again, if you pay attention, these two pawns are weak. You created a weakness on c5 by pushing a5, right? This pawn wasn't weak, but now this pawn has become weak. Now black is facing so many issues. That's a weakness, that's a weakness, and that's a weakness as well. And we have a much better king. And now the bishop start showing its teeth. Please stop the video, folks, and further improve the bishop. The second weakness is the one on h7. Can you intensify your pressure? Can you maximize pressure on these pawns using your bishop? That's your goal, right? And you're a great player if you found the entire sequence, bishop d1, bishop a4, with this idea, folks. The bishop wants to go all the way to g8 to put maximum pressure on those weaknesses. And white has all the time in the world because black has no counterplay. Black has no pawn breaks. Black has no pawn moves to drive our king backwards. Black has to wait. And that's really terrible. Also, look at this. The black king is in zugzwang because he needs to constantly guard the pawn on c5. The multi-purposeness of bishop moving here, we're also cutting off the king, so to speak, right? Just look at the strength of this bishop on that knight, also on the king in general. It's just an amazingly beautiful position. Now the bishop is slowly going and attacking those targets. That's the first target, right? Knight 8 is so terrible. And comes bishop g8. Look at this, folks, right? Just look at the patience of the bishop slowly finding its way all the way to g8, and now black cannot stop. Bishop takes h7 and everything is collapsing basically, right? Now you can also take on e6. There was a zugzwang actually, right? Knight has to move because well, I mean, otherwise I'll just take everything, but if you move, then bishop takes e6 and white is going to win the game very easily. We can even go back to g8 and win everything. So what was the basic message from this instructive endgame, right? What did we learn from this? It's always good to fix those pawns, those weak pawns, on the same color as our bishop, right? Because then the bishop has targets, long-term targets. These are called organic weaknesses, right? Long-term weaknesses on the same color as our bishop, which means they are relevant weaknesses because we can exploit it, right? And now the knight was also lacking all kind of targets, no outpost squares whatsoever. Our king was also much, much stronger. You see, you combine two weaknesses. By engaging in this puzzle, folks, we also get better in converting a winning advantage, right? I'm also showing you basic plans in converting your advantages. Look at the move a5. Very, very important to create one more weakness on c5. This was very relevant. And again, bishop d1 is so instructive because not only cutting off the king, but also eyeing those weaknesses on the queen side. That's why Fischer loved the bishops. Bobby Fischer was a bishop lover. He loved his light square bishop, and probably it's games like this that was shaping his vision about the bishop's strength. Here's a game of Emanuel Lasker with the black pieces. And please evaluate the position is black to play. How would you judge this endgame? Why do you think the bishop side is better if you believe so, right? What are the contours for that? What are the conditions for the bishop to be a better piece than the knight here? First things first, folks. Obviously, our bishop is cutting off and dominating that knight. That knight is a very poor piece. But if you look at our structure, we have double pawns and so on, right? So it's not so clear, so visible yet why black should be even winning in this position. But there's one idea, there's one key idea that I want you to see from this position. First things first, our king will be a better piece than the white king. Our king is centralized easier or quicker than the white king, right? That's already clear. For example, if you go a4 in this position, then king c6, then it's already sort of becoming very dangerous for white to hold their ground, yeah? If you go b4, for example, yes, you're stopping this, but you're also inviting moves like this, right? When it comes to bishop strength, I can simply attack your pawn, and this will give way to my king. Simple as that. So white cannot push the pawns yet. So after king c7, he calls king f1, and here, I want you to stop the video, folks, and find maybe the only winning move for black in this position. Black has a very, very strong positional move that paves way to create a target on the queen side, right? Because we somehow want to use our pieces to create something, some sort of a target to attack on the queen side. But we need a preparatory move first. You're a great player, folks, if you found Lasker's move b5, anticipating inevitable a4 at some point, and then getting ready for takes, and creating a target on a4. Then black will use its king to attack that pawn because our king is so much closer to the queen side, right? b5 is very important because if you start directly with the move bishop b2, then you allow a4, and yes, you might say the king is slowly coming here, but white's a very strong reply, knight f4, and now they're stopping king c5 because of knight d3 fork, right? Calculation is always required. So directly going to b2 with the bishop doesn't work. That's exactly why Emanuel Lasker plays the move b5, and now after king e1, now he goes bishop b2, folks, right? That's the point. And bishop shows its strength by simply attacking that target on a3. We are forcing a concession. We are forcing a4, and after takes, that became a clear target, overextended target that is much easier to attack for black, given our king's position. And see, the bishop is still cutting off the knight, by the way. The bishop is still a well-placed piece, and the king is slowly coming to c5 and later b4 to attack that target on a4. So it is a beautiful game that was demonstrated by Emanuel Lasker. Do you think we should take that knight, by the way? On endgame patterns, folks? No, right? That will be a terrible move because you only improve their king, and there is no invasion for our king, and there is no way that we are winning this pawn endgame. So Lasker instead played the move king b4, obviously, right? That was the whole point. Now this pawn is terribly weak, and we're gonna win something on the queen side. Knight b5, we don't want to trade the pawns, right? Why should we trade the pawns? Because after a5, there is no easy way for white to hold the pawn on a4, and that's how the game went, folks. King takes a4, and you see, now black is created enormously dangerous outside pass pawn on the a file, and this is how the game went. You see, Lasker is showing the strength of the bishop as well, a double attack, and bishop can take on h2, because can they trap our piece? You tell me. Is there a way for white to trap the bishop? No, because if they go g3, the bishop survives. That's not a Fischer-Spassky bishop, right? He'll survive in this position, and in the end, the bishop will dominate the knight. Look at this, right? This pawn will be huge, also on the same color as our bishop. The game is completely over, basically. The bishop shines over the knight here. That's why after bishop takes h2, they tried knight d8. They want to hit the pawn on e6, but comes e5. Everything is well protected, and the rest is also easy to follow. The bishop is again dominating that knight. Look at this, folks, right? The bishop is a very strong piece. can control so many squares, can dominate the knight like this, and it's very difficult also with a pawn down for white to defend this position. So the game continuation is like this. King b5 is very nice. In fact, king b5 highlights the problems faced by the knight. This knight has no escape from that hole, folks. It's impossible, because if he tries this, then bishop e7, followed by slowly attacking the knight and taking that piece. See how the bishop is still dominating that knight? It's incredible. He tried g4, but Lasker played bishop e7 anyways, getting ready for knight d7, and the knight has no escape from there. He tried g5, but if he tried knight d7, comes king c6, and let's trap this piece. King b7 or king c7. Well, if you try king b7, then you love this move again, right? So it's better to start with this one first, and after knight e6, that knight is not going anywhere. See how the bishop and the pawn is dominating that piece, and knight is trapped on a6. The game is over. So that's why he was desperate. He tried the move g5, but after f takes g5, yes, the knight is sort of surviving, but after bishop d6, it's going to be game over very, very soon, folks. After king c4, he resigned. Everything is going to be collapsing. We can even go h6 and defend our pawn, and there is no way for white to actually draw this game, because I mean, look at my pawns, right? I can't even do this with my king, and the game is completely over. But what is the basic lesson from this position? The lesson is that given the bishops are long-range pieces, they favor when there are pawns on both sides. So by simply hitting those targets that are unreachable for a knight, which is a short-range piece, by simply attacking those targets, we can actually induce a weakness. Just like here, right? I simply attack your pawn, not that I can win it directly, but this forces a concession, and then we can later attack that pawn and take it, right? So that's one strength of the bishop over the knight. That's why you hear, for example, the saying that, you know, bishops like when there are pawns on both sides of the board, and that's actually correct, right? That's actually correct, because black was playing on the king side, also on the queen side. You see a centralized bishop showing its teeth on both sides of the board. But if you pay attention to the knight, that's a very, very short range piece, correct? Knights are short range pieces. That's why bishops generally, not always, but generally like when there are pawns on both sides of the board. But here you see, crucially, our king activity was also very important. Our king being so close to the queen side was so important for the entire plan to work. Another chess classic, Reti Rubinstein. Very famous endgame, bishop versus knight. The bishop, by hitting the weakness on c2, forced knight e1. And let's discuss this endgame, folks. What are you seeing? Who is better and why? And why? Black has a better pawn structure. There are pawns on both sides of the board, and the knight is terribly stuck in defending the target on c2. Obviously, black is better. But how can black win this position? And please watch how Rubinstein treated this endgame, folks. He improves the king. Of course, the king has to move up in the endgame. He's highlighting such ideas at some point, but he's not in a hurry. He forces g4 because otherwise king f5 will be relevant. But g4 is also a move that might hurt white, as we'll see in this actual game. King d6, black is not in a hurry. In a position like that, you should relax. You should not hurry. Just take your time. Ask for maximum potential. Maybe bishop d7 is an idea right now, right? Just ask small questions to your opponent. Just massage the position. Because white is zero counterplay, black is all the time in the world. That's why, for example, go g6. g6 can be useful in supporting the break h5, right? Because h5 would like to, let's say, create some squares for our pieces on the king side, right? Maybe f5 will be created. Maybe the bishop would gain more scope. So g6 prepares all this. King d2. Now the king has to be defending passively to activate the knight. But even that knight on the king side will be a bad piece. Rubinstein returns back with the bishop, you see, and he's eyeing this pawn chain, and he's anticipating, preparing the move h5. It's a beautiful position. By the way, folks, that knight is dominated by the pawn at f6. That's a very recurrent theme that you should know. That knight is a terrible piece because of the pawn on f6. And maybe white wants to go g5 to change the picture. That's exactly why Rubinstein makes a prophylactic move here. Prophylaxis. He plays the move king e7, folks. I love this move because he's anticipating g5, and this pawn is defended. So if you go g5, you're dropping a pawn on h3, correct? So by going king e7, he's stopping g5 because you allow this. the king is already protecting this pawn, so to speak, right? See how carefully he's playing this position? And after king e3, you tell me black's next move. Black's next move wants to activate the bishop, guys, and that's exactly why he goes h5 in this position. That's a beautiful move that gives more scope to the bishop. He tried knight h2, but if he took on h5, that's the problem, right? Now the bishop is hitting that target, plus black has gained the f5 square for their pieces, and this forces h4, but as I said, now the king is getting ready for f5 invasions, and this pawn is still dominating that knight on f3. That knight is a terrible piece, has no forward squares from there, but our position will improve further with king f5, king g4, and you're in trouble. You see, that's a beautiful variation to observe, guys. And we can even play for zugzwang here with the move d4, very important. The bishop will be activated on this diagonal, and that knight is still terrible. You see, slow improvement like this, and the end is near, so to speak. Yeah. Now we can even enter this pawn endgame, folks. That's actually beautiful to understand. After b5, king g3, a5, you see, this is a beautiful endgame to watch. This is a beautiful endgame to watch, folks. And the king is coming to b4 and a3, and the game is over, right? It's just one way that this game could have gone if they took on h5. But in the actual game, Reti played the move knight h2, but this gives Rubinstein to activate the king further. He's not in a hurry. Then he goes d4. d4 at first sight looks strange, because why are we sort of giving them a chance, right, to get rid of their double pawns? You tell me, what can be the reason behind the move d4? Please explain this move to yourself and to me using logical terms. Of course, he's activating the bishop further, and he's also stopping king e3 ideas, right? He's giving a square for their pieces as well. That's the whole point of this move d4. It's a very strong positional move, folks, actually. King d2. You see, the knight is now paralyzed in guarding g4, and you see, by taking on g4 first, we are creating a clear target on that side of the board. And now Rubinstein plays a move that also shuts down that knight completely. You tell me, folks. Yes, he goes bishop c6, and you see how the bishop is shining over that poor knight on the edge of the board. He's taking the square f3 from that terrible beast, and the bishop simply is a much better piece, right? If given time, the bishop can even do this and completely cut off the knight, basically, right? That would be a beautiful move. That's why he goes king e2. Well, if he tries c3 here, by the way, folks, then I can take on c3 and play bishop g2. That was just to show my point, right? The bishop is totally shutting down that knight, and the game could have gone like this. Just to show you very briefly, right? The bishop can just return back. That knight is still a terrible piece, and now the game will be finished on the queen side after b4. Okay, so bishop c6, he tries king e2 in the actual game. See how the game went. Bishop d5, massaging the position, forcing one more concession. Maybe now this becomes an option for black, right? He's just having all the cards on the board. Plus, he's introducing one more idea on the queen side, right? By inducing this pawn to a3, those pawns are now getting in contact with each other on the queen side, right? He will probably go a4 first, followed by b4, followed by a3. All the breakthrough ideas are also present on the queen side for black. You see how pawns on both flanks are favoring the bishop in this position? It's not so much about the king's activity, but purely about minor piece difference in this position. And here, Rubinstein comes up with the move a4. That's a great move that you should internalize. That's a chess pattern. You start with the move first. It looks ridiculous. Why are we freezing those pawns? But think again, right? Because breakthrough idea b4 is very powerful. And after it takes a3, the pawn is running, right? So by playing a4, this a pawn is getting one square closer to the promotion, and black is now threatening at some point to push b4 with the a pawn running, right? It's a beautiful idea, and white has no defense against this, unfortunately. If white keeps on waiting, then you play g5 to activate your king, to create an outpost for your king, right? And you win like this. That's a very nice pattern as well. This undermining move g5. We'll see this again in this game, folks, right? That's a beautiful finish. If you go knight f1 here, then b4 idea. Look at this, folks. And this pawn is just running. No one can stop the pawn. Look at this, right? And if you try knight b1, this is too passive, because then you invite king c5 followed by b4. That's even simpler to understand. and a3, a2 will cost you the knight. It's a beautiful position after a4. White is no defense, folks. He tried knight e4, but of course, Rubinstein knows his pawn endgames. He chops that knight off, and that's also the good thing about having bishops, as they say, you can always exchange your bishop for knight at some point. That's a good trade for bishop for black, because the resulting endgame is winning. And you tell me the next move. You stop the video and you tell me the next move for black. And yes, you're a great player if you found the breakthrough move b4, right? There is no time for this because our pawn is outside of the zone of the white king, right? The square rule, of course, and the queen first. But if you can't take my pawn, then your king needs to get paralyzed in dealing with these outside passed pawns. And our king should decide the game on the king side. And you tell me, what is that deciding move for black? Black to play that forced a resignation here. Pawn endgame patterns, the art of awakening pieces. Yes, you're a great player if you found the move g5 and you're awakening your king in this position by undermining that pawn, right? This pattern is pervasive and recurrent, so it's good that you work on these pawn patterns to awaken your pieces. And after g5, Reti resign, because if you take the pawn on g5, then my king on e5 will win all your pawns. If you push f5, then king e5 comes anyways. And if you play a5, e5 check, takes after f5, those pawns are running, and I'm stopping your pawn easily with my king, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful game. If you take a step back and if you start already from this position, see how Rubinstein flexibly played on both sides of the board. By hitting the pawn on c2, he tied down the enemy pieces. He kept it very flexible with the move h5. He was very careful about g5 ideas, and how the bishop dominated that knight on the edge of the board. d4 is so beautiful, right? To activate the bishop even further, to give further squares to the king and so on. Just an amazing, beautiful endgame, folks, right? You can learn tremendously from such chess classics and see how he built up the queen side as well. By the way, we generally say that bishops like those positions with asymmetrical pawn structures. Capablanca said that actually, right? Bishop versus knight. Bishops like if the structure is not fully symmetrical. Here's a perfect illustration. This pawn structure is not symmetrical, meaning that black has the breakthrough idea on the queen side. And since the outside pass pawn is a huge factor, that white also needs to be careful about other ideas on the king side, like invasions like this, right? White cannot hold both flanks because the bishop is playing on both flanks beautifully, but white pieces are constrained on a single area. So this pawn structure being asymmetrical, this a4 and b4 becomes an option for black, also helps the bishop side in this position. I'm explaining all these things to you folks to teach you those chess patterns, so that once you deeply engage with the material, there's a real chance that you can apply this to your games. At least some parts of this lesson should be memorizable for you. You can use some flashcards, you can write down, you can maybe save some positions on a flashcard, and you can revisit those again at some point if you think that you will forget about everything like in a short time, right? Or you can come back to the video and ask yourself the right questions by stopping and by actively engaging with the material. That's a famous position from a game of Alekhine with the white pieces. White to play, folks. Please stop the video, evaluate the position first. What is going on here? What are you seeing? And is there a way for white to drastically change the picture and achieve a crashing advantage? That's a complex puzzle, but so nice also. It's a beautiful, almost like a chess study. Please give yourself some time and maybe you can find a solution here, okay? Folks, first things first. The bishop sucks. The bishop is a tall pawn in this pawn formation. Bishops don't like when the pawns are stuck on the same color as the bishop, right? We all know that. We are lacking mobility. Plus, bishop has no clear targets on the black's camp. Plus, if you give time to black, they will have the most amazing knight in the world with the move knight d7 followed by knight e5. And then such ideas exist and our king will be attacked by the queen and knight combo, right? So in this position, there is no time to lose for white. It's a critical moment. You must do something in this position. And Alekhine is a great guy. He knows how to awaken his pieces. Can you see the move that prepare the bishop activation. It looks like an impossible move, but once you really dig deeper, once your goal is to activate your bishop at all costs, that should be a candidate. And you're a great player if you found Alekhine's double exclam e5. This should be double exclam, folks. I will change it double exclam because of its beautiful value, because of its explosive nature. What is the point of e5? He wants to basically activate his bishop somehow, right? After f6, for example, I take on g4, and I play bishop e4, and my bishop become activated, and I will take on f3 with the extra pawn in the endgame, right? This was the whole point. By also playing e5, he's stopping black knight from arriving to e5 in 2 moves. That's a very multi-purpose pawn break. And if you take on d5, on the d6 pawn on the e5 square, you tell me, folks. You start the video and tell me Alekhine's real point here. You're a great player if you found the move d6, and the whole idea is to get the bishop to d5. As Kasparov said once, the worst bishop is better than a knight in chess, and this example sort of humorously showed that side of chess, right? This bishop was really looking like a terrible creature, and in 2 moves, the bishop became the giant, the best piece in the entire board. Just please take a stock and see how he activates his bishop in this central pawn formation. And after this, queen g6, for example, threatens mate in 1, and if the queen returns and defends, the pawn runs. Now queen e8, a devastating threat. You can't take my pawn because of this, right? Otherwise, the game is completely over. Black needs to resign in his position, and that's exactly how the game went, by the way, right? That's exactly how the game went, and after d7, white is completely winning because of the bishop, the passpawn, and the queen. It's a beautiful combo. Again, what are the contours for us to find such moves? That's a key question to me. You know, what are you seeing? What are the basic lessons that you can take from such examples, right? On the surface, this bishop sucks, but this pawn is not fixed on e4 yet. If there was a knight on e5, then this bishop will be truly terrible because there will be no way to change the picture. But I made a video about pawn breaks. This pawn break is designed to activate the bishop at all costs, right? Because if you still go knight e7, then my pawn becomes huge on e6. That's too much of a concession for black to make. Get a knight on e5. Maybe that's still how black should play, by the way, right? But that pawn is actually quite a huge pawn right now. Black cannot afford it. But if you take with the f pawn, then the bishop activates like this, and this pawn falls directly. That's easy to understand. And if you take with the d pawn, that's when magic happens. By the way, even c5 is not a bad move here, with the sole purpose of activating the bishop with the move bishop b3 and d6 to follow. But d6 directly, why not? Because your bishop is coming to d5 in 2 moves anyways. And if they try this, folks, then I guess we can even do this, c5 followed by bishop b3, and the bishop is becoming a monster, right? This is my compass here. My idea is that how am I going to activate my bishop, right? That's sort of the first question. Your bishop sucks. You're searching for ways to activate the bishop in this position, and that's how you find such strange looking, paradoxical looking moves, by talking to your pieces first. And this example is shocking, it's very striking, but I guess you got the basic lesson from this, that the bishops are very, very strong pieces. So if the central structure is not fully decided, is not fully set, then such surprising pawn breaks should be in your radar, right? Before you give up on the activation of your bishop, you should exhaust all possible pawn breaks, pawn transformations, to activate your bishop, to give him more room and scope and so on, right? I love this example. Hopefully you liked it as well. I use this position in my course, The Art of Multi-Purpose Moves, because this move not only activates the bishop, but also takes away black's positional idea of establishing a knight on e5. If white makes a normal move here, then you allow knight e7. If you keep on waiting, you allow knight e5, and good luck playing this position with white pieces because the bishop sucks. And look at knight on e5. You created a monster on that square, plus g3s are coming, and it's actually easier to play this position with the black pieces. White needs to go for a draw with a perpetual check from this position. This will be your homework position, folks. It's white to play the bishop versus the knight. What's going on? Who is better and why? How would you play this position with white? Yes, we have a much better king, but how do you win this position? I want you to formulate a winning plan from this position. Lay down your thoughts to you. Write to me on YouTube. What is your winning plan? How would you treat this position? What are you seeing in this position? and how does the bishop shine over the knight, how do you convert this position. Okay, I hope you like this episode, folks. I did it again just to give you guidances of some sort of a compass, some sort of a desired state that you can navigate our complex game of chess. Now you know some patterns which makes the bishop a better piece over the knight. This means, first of all, you can play those endgames in a much more efficient way, but also your middle game decisions will be much better because you know what your desired states are. You know your end goals, thus you can go for the right piece trade to reduce the position to a good bishop versus a bad knight scenario, right? That's a function of such training. We are learning new patterns and chunks to make it applicable to our games because every single game will feature those imbalances, you know? Knight and bishop exist all the time, that imbalance. Still one of the most interesting things in chess, you know, despite all these years of like exploration and analysis, we still don't know whether bishop or knight is a better piece. No, it depends on the context, obviously. There are also several positions that knights can shine over the bishops, right? But I just showed you today basic guidelines of what makes a bishop a better piece over the knight. And please summarize those lessons yourself and write to me on YouTube. I'm always welcoming your summaries because summarizing the lesson is a great way of consolidating what you just learned. So please use that opportunity to write a small comment to me on YouTube. What are your observations and what are the lessons that you took from this video? Please do that and I will give you feedback and also you will learn more this way. If you like this video, folks, please give me a like and subscribe. That's very important for me to be able to produce similar content. And if you like to explore these concepts, please check my Chessable course, The Art of Exchanging Pieces, which highlights so many exchange decisions on achieving a good knight versus bad bishop or a good bishop versus a bad knight, as in this case. Thank you so much.